hold it. Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi. So Preeti will be moderating today's session.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems your video is working fine now.
I hope you can hear me, Tanisha.
Yes,
You can
yes.
hear me, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So Meenakshi, Preeti will be moderating today's session. She
Okay.
will be the moderator, and
Okay.
she'll start with the presentation. She'll give a brief introduction about the session, about you as a speaker, and
Okay.
then you can start with your presentation. So we'll run for like 40 to 45 minutes. You can run your PPT, and like for 10 minutes we'll have a Q&A round, and we'll close the session by 5:30. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's fine. In fact, I was thinking that, 30 minutes, I think will be enough so that we can have more time for question and answers and more kind of, an interactive discussion will
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seems fine.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Okay.
so like
And
we'll start.
I'll be sharing the screen when I'll be using the presentation, right?
Yes,
I'll be
yes,
sharing.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
of now,
Okay.
we'll share the screen, like
Yeah.
because we'll start the session by 4:30, and we'll give a brief introduction, and then you can share your screen. Fine.
Yeah. Start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. and welcome to the third session of CPD initiative by S. Chan Publishing. My name is Preeti Kashyap, and I am delighted to host today's session, which is specially designed for pre-primary teachers. We hope you have been enjoying the session so far and are ready to dive into another enriching topic. In this session, we'll be understanding early assessments, exploring practical strategies and techniques for assessing young children in meaningful ways. Understand how assessments can help in building a solid foundation for lifelong learning. We encourage you to participate actively in this session. Feel free to ask questions, share your experiences, and engage in interactive segments. Participate in the quiz tomorrow after the final session. We'll share the quiz link with you after the last session concludes. Now let's get to know our esteemed speaker for this session, Ms. Meenakshi Dogra. She is an early childhood development and learning professional with more than 14 years of experience. In India, she led a multi-state pan-India research project on developing early learning and development standards for children while working with Center for Early Childhood Education and Development at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Internationally, she has served as consultant with UNICEF regional offices in Pacific, Uzbekistan, and Asia Pacific regional network for early childhood. Her extensive experience and dedication to early childhood education make her an invaluable resource for us today. A very warm welcome, Ms. Meenakshi. Before I hand it over to Ms. Meenakshi, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping rules for everyone. Participants will be muted throughout the entire session. Please ensure you have a pen and a paper to note down important information. The chat box will only be enabled during the Q&A round and as required by the speaker. To receive your e-certificates, please fill out the feedback form that will be sent to your registered email ID after the session. Don't forget to participate in the quiz tomorrow after the final session. So without any further delay, let's dive into the world of early childhood assessment. Ms. Meenakshi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Preeti, for the introduction. Let me share my screen first so that you can see the presentation. I hope you can see my presentation.
Not yet, Meenakshi. It's not visible.
Okay, just give me a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Is it visible?
Yeah, it's visible now, Meenakshi. Yeah, perfect. Good to go.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. Good evening. And thank you for participating in this today's session. I'm happy and thankful, for this opportunity to present this very, significant topic on assessment during foundational year. So I'm thankful for Eschan for giving that opportunity to me so that I can talk about this important topic. And I'm happy to learn from you that how we can collaboratively see that support this important area in the field of foundational state. So so please feel free to drop in your questions or anything you have in the chat box. I'll be tracking my chat box for anything you have anything you want to ask me throughout the session. Yeah. So in this today's session, we are going to focus on 4 key areas. Firstly, kind of refreshing what you already know, especially in terms of, what is the need and importance of assessing children's learning and development. And what are some of those techniques which we can use for assessing learning and development of children, which you are already using in your classrooms, especially, the techniques related to continuous assessment of young children. What else we can use for supporting the continuous assessment of young children. So we'll, kind of like talk about some of those techniques. And when we are going to talk about these continuous assessment as a method, I would also like to highlight an example of one of the tools which has been developed by Ministry of Education, Ministry of Women and Child Development, actually, for understanding how children should be observed during everyday activities. What are some of the key principles we can keep in mind while we are while we are using continuous assessment method with young children? And lastly, we are also going to, kind of touch upon how assessment data can be, so the data which we are going to collect through different techniques, how we can utilize that data further, how we can, analyze that data, how you can use that data for improving the classroom practices, which can ultimately lead to improving the child outcomes. But before I kind of, start the session, we get into the session, I want you to please introduce yourself in the chat box. Please feel free to share your name and years of experience working with young children so that I can know who all are here with us today and joining us from, for this important session. So please feel free to share your names and years of experience in the chat box. I think we can take 2 minutes quickly so that you all can, kind of share and I can see who all are here with us. Wow. We have so many people. Yes, I can see so many people with very good experience in this field. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you all. Good evening, everyone. So we are going to have a good mixed, kind of a good range from, I can see, from 3 years to 15 years to 16 years of experience in this field. Interesting. Yes. Okay. So as you all, kind of going to continue, introduce yourself. So let's, kind of start this session and go to the next slide. Yeah. So before, I kind of talk about what assessment is and how we should do assessment and, kind of talk about all the assessment, kind of things which I was thinking about. I think it's very important to first talk about, what assessment is. What comes to our mind when we think about, the word assessment. So for this, I want to, kind of like understand from you, what do you think, what comes to your mind when you hear the word assessment? And for this, for responding to this question, you need to go to www.menti.com and enter this code, which is 7608719. Or you can scan the QR code also and you can respond to this question. So we can take around 3-4 minutes for responding to this question so that we can see what kind of responses, interesting responses comes to this, this very important question. What do we think about assessment? So please go to this link, menti.com, and you can either enter this code or you can also scan the QR code. And I can see some of the responses, have started coming. So assessment is understanding, evaluation, skills. Please keep sharing your views. I hope you all can access the Mentimeter. If you are not, then you can also please feel free to share your response in the chat box. I'll track your response later after the session. So please do that. Okay, so assessment is measuring, checking gaps in learning. Absolutely. Business, student learning. Okay. So far we have got only 9 responses. So I'm expecting more responses for this question. So please continue adding your responses. So, okay. So most of us are saying monitoring. It is monitoring. Yes. Evaluation. Okay, so we are getting some different kind of responses also. So assessment is skills, assessment is testing, grading. Okay. What else? Any other response? Anything else? Because I can see we still have so many people who have not responded yet. So I've received only 19 responses. So please continue adding your response here. Okay, evaluate or check. Checking gaps in learning. Absolutely. And what else we have? Progress, for checking progress. Okay. Can we get some more responses? Those who have not taken this, please either scan the QR code or use Mentimeter, code for giving your response. You can also use chat box. Understanding the level, feedback from the student. Interesting. Assessment is feedback from the student. Effectiveness. Okay. So what else? Anything else? Anything different from what we have, kind of received or heard so far? Any different kind of response from all our participants who have joined us today? Any more responses? I can see in the chat box also we have got very good responses. Assessment is observation, exploring thinking, presentation, mental development, creativity, interesting, collaboration, development, determination. Okay, holistic development, critical thinking, observation. Yes. Okay. So we got so many, kind of like variety of responses when we, kind of think about assessment, when we hear this word assessment. So, and there are, kind of like different purposes also, which is, kind of involved when we talk about assessment. So we are going to see that, whatever we are thinking in terms of what assessment is, how that definition and how that perception is actually fits into the overall perspective. So we are going to, kind of see how, like understanding is fitting into this whole context of assessing, especially assessing young children. So before we I kind of talk about how to assess young children, I think it is like, first of all, it is very important to kind of like reflect that when we talk about like assessment, it is like assessment is something that we use in everyday life. Okay, so we are using assessment in different instances. So for example, while we are cooking, we often we check if the dal or sabzi is cooked well or not. We see that whether the sabzi needs more time to cook, or more kind of salt or less salt, or more oil, so that we can get the taste which we are looking for. Or while we we go for buying clothes, we assess that if that dress is going to suit me, right? If the dress is appropriate as per the occasion or not. So we use assessment in different scenarios, right? So I want to hear from you that where you use assessment in your daily life. So where what are those situations, what are those instances where you use assessment, where you evaluate your situations? And this can be anything, any example from your own life, from your own work, where you use assessment in your daily life. So tell me that where you are using assessment in your daily life. So for responding to this question, you can please feel free to use the chat box and tell me that, how you are using assessment in your daily life. Where are you using right now assessment? Absolutely. I got this response in planning household expenses. Yes, preparing lesson plans everywhere. Definitely, we are using everywhere assessment through activities. After every activity, we are, after every content, we are using assessment while preparing lesson plans. So this is, how you're using assessment in your work, teaching methodology and aids, while planning teaching methodologies and aids. Okay. Or making concepts easy. Yeah. So we are, so we use, so assessment is something that, we use in our daily life for different scenarios, so that we can understand whether, the situation is appropriate or not, how we can make the situation, how, so for example, as I talked about buying clothes, so we can see that, whether the dress is going to fit me or not, or whether the dress is appropriate as per the occasion or not. So there, the assessment as a method can help me to evaluate, the dress, and so that I can buy that dress. So now when we talk about, okay. So when we talk about assessment in early years, we use assessment in the context of preschool. And there are various ways of using assessment, but all this depends upon the purpose. What is our purpose of using assessment? Why do we want to use assessment? Why do we want to, either we want to assess the quality of preschool, or we want to assess young children? Why do we want to we want to do that? What is the purpose? What purpose it's going to kind of solve? So that purpose needs to be very clear when we are using assessment, especially during early years, especially with young children, especially in the context of preschool. So in this in this context, before kind of I get into that, why do we want to do that, I also want to kind of understand from you, why do you think we should assess young children? Because especially because in this particular session we are going to focus on assessing young children. I want to hear from you why you think assessment of young children is important. Why should we assess young children specifically? And I want your responses, especially around these this given option. So we have provided some multiple choice options here. So you can choose as you think that, as you agree to these options that, why should we assess young children? So for responding to these questions, you need to go yourmenti.com, same website, use the same code, or you can use the QR code also, and you can respond to this question. So we'll wait here for 3-4 minutes for you to respond to this question. You can choose one option also, or you can choose multiple options also. It's up to you what you want to choose. But please do respond to this question. Why should we assess young children? I see people, those who can't, access the Mentimeter, they are responding in the chat box. So for monitoring progress, for understanding the child level and development, holistic development. Those who can access, please use the Mentimeter so that we can, kind of get the visual of these responses also. What you all think about, why we should assess young children. Okay, so I can see that, maybe many people are, kind of having issues using with the Mentimeter, and I can see many of them are responding in the chat box. And I can see people are saying all of these responses, or, they are using assessment for assessing the effectiveness of their program, or, for checking, for ensuring the accountability to the families. And, they are using assessment so that they can help teachers for creating lesson plans. So, okay. I can see you. There's some problem with the Mentimeter, so I think we are fine if we use the chat box. I'll keep track on to your responses, and see what kind of responses we are getting. Okay. So for milestone achievements, and so we see that we have different perspectives. We have different kind of like understanding why we should assess young children. So if I talk about from from my experience, and overall, especially that why we are talking about assessment, why it is very important, very kind of like significant to talk about assessment, especially in the context of early childhood education. Then in this context, I would like to specifically highlight that evidence from the data from various sources, which especially from National Achievement Survey, which you must be aware about this, the survey, National Achievement Survey, which Ministry of Education conducts in every 2 or 3 years, or the famous survey, which is ASAR, Annual Status of Education Report Survey, which shows that a significant proportion of children who cannot read, or who cannot, do simple, mathematical, cannot solve simple mathematical concepts. And this proportion, of children who cannot read, and, who cannot understand simple text or mathematical concepts, has increased to 70% in low and middle income countries, and India is one of them. And this learning crisis, which I'm talking about, where the children are not able to achieve those grade appropriate skills, or not able to achieve those grade appropriate learning outcomes, the root cause of this problem is actually lies in the early childhood years of the child, because these are the years which lays the foundation for foundational skills, which lays the foundation for the skills which are important for for later classes, where the child can start formal reading and formal writing, and can understand formal can understand the mathematical concepts. So so these these are the foundational years which are really important for building those foundations. And when children, they don't get those foundations, they struggle to make those transitions smooth. They struggle to adjust to the classrooms later in later grades. They struggle to achieve those age and developmentally appropriate learning outcomes because of those weak foundations. So it's very important that we talk about assessment. We think about assessment. We think about assessing young children right from the beginning, so that we can understand, we can identify the learning and developmental gaps in children, so that we can see what support is needed, what kind of support we can provide to children, what kind of support is required for making improvements in our own practices, so that we can support, we can help children to achieve those developmental milestones. So that's why it's very important to think about assessment right from the beginning, so that we can address those gaps, we can address the learning crisis, right? So when we talk about the assessment in the context of early childhood education in early years, so it is to understand that so that the purpose is to understand what children know. What are their skills, what are their concepts, their interests, their styles, and their learning needs. And this information can help you to understand about the each child, help you to understand that what are the needs of the child, where the child, what kind of support is needed for the child. And this guides the whole learning process, where we are aware about the learning needs of the child, so that we can design the learning process, we can design the teaching practices accordingly, as per the need and the level of the child. So that's why it is very important to think assessment in early years from the perspective of not from the child, but from the perspective of making improvements in the whole system, improvements in our current teaching and learning practices, so that we can support the holistic learning and development of children. And so if I give you an overview of why, why we assess children's work, then it helps us to inform the instruction. So when we, use early assessment, when we start assessments in early year, it can help us in tailoring the teaching, practices, so that we can meet the individual needs for promoting those effective learning right from the beginning. So it can guide you on how to create those targeted, interventions to support the children's literacy and numeracy development. Secondly, it can help us to identify the learning gaps. So early assessment can help you to, to actually identify the learning difficulties and developmental delays, which can help you to, provide the timely support to the child. And this proactive approach can actually prevent the small gaps from becoming the significant barriers to learning later on in later grades. Thirdly, it promotes the holistic development. So assessment in early childhood can, needs to include the holistic development of the child, needs to include all the aspects of development, needs to include cognitive development, social, emotional, physical development. So by supporting all the areas of development, we can ensure that children are well-rounded, they are ready to succeed in school and beyond. Fourthly, it needs to engage the families. It needs to ensure that there is an accountability to the families and communities. So sharing assessment results with the families can help us to foster a collaborative approach, more collaborative approach for addressing this learning crisis, which I talked about. So we need to engage parents as active participants in their child's education, because children are going to spend some of their time in the school, but most of their time they are going to spend at home. So it is very important to provide that learning environment at home. And for that, we need to be in touch with the parents and, need to make them aware about, how they can provide that learning environment, so that they can also support the child's learning, the child's development at home also through some stimulating activities. So engaging families is very important when we are assessing young children. And lastly, it needs to, it can support the policy and practices. So data from early assessment can actually help in making more evidence informed policy decisions, and can help in improving the practices. So this evidence based approach can ensure that the resources are directed where they are needed the most, and where we can get the maximum impact, where the children are more, more kind of most needed. So that is the purpose of assessment that we need to keep in mind when we are thinking about assessment for young children. So, what are some of the key principles of assessing children, which we need to keep in mind, and which are required to, kind of like included in the assessment process? So we know that children, they achieve every milestone, they achieve these new learning milestones every day. So it is very important that we observe children in their everyday play and learning situations. So the assessment needs to be, so that's why the whole assessment process needs to be formative in nature. So for example, we need to do it at regular interval, in small intervals of time, so that we can use different ways of assessing children. So at the same time, we also need to understand, there is no fixed way of learning or measuring children. So we need to actually assess children in different situations so that we can understand them holistically, right? So that's very important when we are thinking about assessment of young children. Second, we need to keep in mind that it's an ongoing process. So assessment of children should be continuous. It should be, it should involve various methods. It should involve observation, as some of you already mentioned. It should involve interactions, collecting information, collecting children's work, which they do in the classroom. So we need to, keep all these things in our mind when we are assessing young children, because every child is different. So we need to keep that in mind. So there are different ways of learning also. So when we observe children, so we'll see that some children, they might express themselves through enacting, and some children might talk about talk about their feelings, or some children will show their their feelings or their emotions through their work. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep those different styles in mind, so that as a teacher, we should be ready to observe children in all the scenarios, and note that the children use different developmental pathways when we are observing children. Fourthly, we know that since children are very young, especially when we are talking about early childhood education, children are very young, and there can be multiple factors influencing the result of assessment. So for example, sometimes child will not be in a mood, and some child some child who might kind of perform otherwise be able to perform at a given task. Someday the child is not kind of like in a mood to perform that task. So we need to be observant of the child on everyday situation, so that we can give multiple opportunities to the child. So we need to provide those multiple opportunities, so that we can keep those different scenarios in mind, which the children go through. Then we need to see that child must not be made to take any test, either it is written or oral test, under any situation, especially when we are talking about young children. So we need to be, keep in mind that the assessment needs to be qualitative in nature. It needs to be objective in nature, so that we can record the observations and interactions of children in a more kind of a daily routine, during the daily routine activities of children. Then the next, the most important thing to keep in mind is the purpose of assessment is not to evaluate the child. Rather, the purpose is to identify the areas where the child need more, kind of the most support, where we need to improve, so that we can provide more quality experience to the child. So the assessment is for us as a feedback, for us to understand what needs to be strengthened further so that we can provide more holistic experience to the child. So it's not to evaluate or label any child, it's to give us the feedback, what kind of teaching and learning strategies we need to use so that we can give that appropriate support to the child. Then lastly, assessment is not is not to be kind of kept in records only. So we need to share, as I mentioned earlier, also we need to share this information with the parents on regular basis so that we can involve them in the process. We can involve them. We can tell them how they can support us with when we are planning the support strategies with the child, when we are helping the child to improve in some of those skills, how parents can play that role, how they can create that environment at home so that when we are kind of planning some specific activities in the classroom, how they can further add on and kind of boost that support at home through those learning activities, through those targeted stimulating activities which can help the child to achieve those developmental milestones where the child is lacking. So these are some of the principles which we can keep in mind overall, the principle which we can mind. So just to quickly kind of overview, give you the overview, then so what to assess is that the purpose is to observe the child's development in a holistic manner. So, while considering the outcomes associated with each domain, so that we focus on the holistic development of the child rather than focusing on one domain or single skill of the child. So, in early years, the focus should be on the holistic development of the child. When to assess in everyday situation, when children are playing with their friends, when they are listening to the stories, when they are recreating their situations, when they are interacting, in everyday situations, we can assess children. And in their natural settings, we need to assess children. Then how we can assess that? We can use different methods. I'll talk about these methods a little bit in detail, that, what kind of methods we can use. So, before I kind of talk about these methods and kind of provide more details about some of these things which we talked about, especially the principles. So let's identify some of these different skills which can be observed in these examples. So I would like to share one example. So you can see this first example where one child, RV drew an umbrella using colors and matchstick. She used the stick to show handle of the umbrella and used fingerprints to make water drops. So now in this example, can you tell me that, what skill the child is learning? What we can what skill we can express, we can assess through this particular, situation where the child is engaged in this particular activity. So what you can express, so you can assess, so you can respond to this question in the chat box. So please feel free to give your response. So I can see people are saying creative development. Okay. We got one on fine motor. We can assess fine motor skills, imagination. Okay. Aesthetics, creativity with critical thinking, imagination, creative and fine motor skills. Okay. Interesting. Logical thinking, developmental milestones. So this developmental milestones is it's kind of very broad. So we need to narrow it down that, because from each specific activity, we can assess specific skills, right? So we need to see what specific skill we can assess, during that particular situation. So from this example, I agree with most of you that, we can assess creative development. We can assess, creative development because, the child is we are giving an opportunity to the child to choose colors, right? Through this activity, we can give that, we can give that opportunity to the child to choose colors, and the child is also using stick to show the handle of the umbrella. So that is creativity. That how what materials we can use creatively for while drawing. So that's creativity. And where the child is using fingerprints, so that's fine motor skills. So we can assess the fine motor skills also during this activity. Now let's go to the next example where the child Ria is putting beads in a string in a pattern of red, white, red while counting. She can also solve puzzles of 4-5 pieces. So now what skill the child is learning? What we can assess from this particular activity? Okay, I can see logical thinking, eye-hand coordination, cognitive development. Can we break it down, Jyoti? Can we break it down, the cognitive development piece? What specific skill we can assess through this activity? Under cognitive development, what specific skill we can thinking? Okay, so you're saying thinking we can assess. Pattern with eye-hand coordination, color matching. Okay, color matching is good. Creativity. Okay. Identifying things. Okay. I'm not sure about identifying things, because if you read the description, here we are not asking the child to identify, but yes, I kind of agree that it's more like an activity for eye-hand coordination, more activity, where we can assess whether the, it's also about counting, right? Numeracy, pre-number concepts, which we say, because the child is counting, red. After red, white will come. After white, again red will come. So the counting is coming. The conceptual understanding of sequence, right? Sequential thinking, absolutely, Varalakshmi. Sequential thinking, order, absolutely. So this, red will come. After red, white will come, and after white, red will come. Right. So the sequence, the understanding of the sequence, and when the child is solving puzzle. So I see that, problem solving, where the child is, kind of have, we can assess the problem solving skills of the child. We can also assess the logical thinking. We can also assess the eye-hand coordination during this particular activity. Now let's go to the next example, where Raj likes to help others, and he tries to comfort Aditi and offers his toy when she cries to go home. So can you tell me what skill we can assess here? What child is learning? Empathy and sharing, social development, okay, emotional development, sharing and caring, absolutely, kindness, okay. You all are, you already know so many things. I can see, all the teachers, they're giving very fantastic responses to these questions, values, cooperative nature, kindness, emotional development, helping nature. So these are, some of the, the skills which we can assess. And what these scenarios tells us, if I tell you that, so overall, all these scenarios are showing us that we can use one single activity for assessing multiple domains of development. So it's not, so one activity is not limited to assessing, or achieving one skill. It can lead to multiple skills. So same with this example 3, here we can talk about social development. Here we can talk about emotional development, right? Here we can also, talk about, sympathy, the concept of sympathy. So one particular activity we can use for, which we conduct with children, we can use that particular activity for assessing different domains of development. And that's why we need to give multiple opportunities to the child, so that we can assess their development. And when we are kind of talking about this, we need to keep in mind that the development is not in silos, is not going to happen in silos. So it's a cross-cutting theme. So when we are thinking about young children, we need to address their development across all the domains of development, right? So now let's go to the next slide. I hope you all can see my slide. Okay, so when I talked about that, I'm going to also share one of the noteworthy examples of using continuous assessment of young children. So here I would like to share an example of child assessment cards, which has been developed by Ministry of Women and Child Development. So these assessment cards is a very good example for actually using continuous assessment as a method with young children. And I'm going to share some of the learnings from using these assessment cards in various, like the states, and so that you can learn some of the key insights based on my experience, that how we can use a method of continuous assessment within our classroom, so that we can make we can make use of this assessment method for understanding the holistic development of children. So these assessment cards are actually designed to gain the insights about young children's learning and development, and so that one can understand that whether the child is developmentally on track or not on track. So these assessment cards are expected to be filled by ECE workforce through ongoing assessment, and they are expected to assess children, so you'll see that this assessment card is for 5 to 6 years. So there are two more assessment cards for 3 to 4 and 4 to 5. So the ECE workforce is expected to observe the child based on multiple, kind of observation. Then they're expected to fill these assessment cards. So these assessment cards addresses all the domains of development, and these are in line with the national, ECE curriculum framework and ECE policy we have for India. So if I talk about, how these assessment cards are currently being used, so what so how these assessment cards are used? So during these everyday processes, through observations, interactions, and samples of children works, so EC workforce, they are expected to kind of assess children. So they are expected to use these everyday situations, do multiple observations, and they kind of collect samples of children's work. They also record their kind of observations, and then they maintain all these kind of portfolios. And then after collecting all the required information which is required for assessing children, then they go to the next step, which is the recording of the assessment. So first we collect all the evidence, and then we record it. So we do the assessment, we do multiple times, and then only we record it. So after so how we can record it? So after every kind of like class, these EC workforce, especially the Anganwadi workers, they are expected to kind of record their observations, their daily interactions with the child in their diary or in their portfolio. So this is how they kind of record their observations. And then after every 3 months, through using these child assessment cards, they report their their assessment. So these children, they needs to be observed during everyday activities, and they observe the Anganwadi workers or the EC workforce. They actually record the observation, and they fill these they fill each indicator of these child assessment cards after multiple observations, and they report their observation within these cards after every 3 months, so that they give enough time to the child for understanding the learning and development of the child. So but if I talk about what have been my key learnings while using this child assessment card. So I would like to highlight here that because as the assessment is based on day-to-day activities and interactions, so we need to be observant of each child throughout the year. So it's not it should not be restricted to specific assessment day or a specific assessment month. So we need to be aware of how the child is progressing, how the child is performing in everyday activity. So we need to be observant as a teacher how the child is progressing. Second, we observe that the observation needs to be recorded. So whenever we are observing children, so we don't need to observe all the children at the same time. We can see, maybe we can kind of make groups, and we can decide that on day one how many children we want to observe, and on day two how many children we want to observe. So based on this, we can see we need to record our observations also in our diaries, in our portfolio, so that we can collect all the required data. Then children's level needs to be marked somewhere. So we need to use some kind of tool so that we can kind of like mark our our responses based on the observation. So in these assessment cards, Anganwadi workers and EC workforce are expected to mark the cards 4 times a year. So they need to fill these cards in every 3 months based on their observations and based on the samples and the portfolios they maintain for children. And after doing that thorough kind of analysis, they record their data within these child assessment cards. And these assessment cards are also expected to be shared with parents so that they can mutually kind of agree on when they want to share this information, and what role parents can play in supporting the learning and development of the child. So this is how these assessment cards are expected to fill. If I kind of quickly talk about what are some of the assessment methods which one can use, so for gaining the understanding of the children's learning and development, we know that no special testing or no special mechanism or tool is required. So we can actually observe children's behavior in everyday routines. We can observe children during these activities. So for example, we can observe children's language and communication skills during mealtime. So when they are having lunch, when they're having breakfast, we can see how the children are interacting with you as a teacher, or how children are interacting with other children in the classroom. Or we can assess children's knowledge of book handling, during when they are reading picture books, when they are going through picture books, when they are going through stories. So we can assess their knowledge of book handling and bonding with books also. So it is important that when we are using different methods of assessing young children, it is important that we maintain record of children's observation, and for that we need to maintain a proper diary for the same, so that we can easily access during class time, during after class time, where we want to note our observation. So this can be so we don't need to prepare kind of detailed observations. So these can be running records or some pointers, so which can give us an idea how the children are performing, how the children are progressing, performing through these activities. Secondly, when we are observing these when we are making observations, when we are doing these observations, we do not need to draw conclusions based on our single observation, as I mentioned earlier also. So we need to observe multiple time in varied situations, so that we can understand the child fully. We can understand, we can keep in mind the child's, emotional state, child's mood in mind, because those things really impact the child's engagement. Those things really impact the performance of the child. So we need to keep those things in mind while we are observing the child through observation. Then secondly, through interaction with the children, through one-to-one interaction, through group interactions with the children, we can understand their thinking process, we can understand their language, their reasoning, their feelings. So for example, during a classification activity, when we are conducting a classification activity in the classroom, we can ask some questions related to, what is the reason, what should be the reason of a particular, while we are classifying objects on the basis of one concept. So we can ask some thought-provoking questions through which we can assess the current understanding or the current level of the child for during a particular activity. Then during the classroom processes, we can also we know that children, they create some product. So they draw, they create paintings, they develop models from clay. There'll be some drawing pieces, writing pieces of children. So we can collect all these pieces, we can collect all these samples, because all these samples can tell us about their skills and understanding of concepts. So it is very important to keep all these records maintained. It is important to maintain portfolio of each and every child, so that we can use that information for effectively understanding how the child is progressing and where we need to provide the support. So where, what areas, what specific skills where the child is lacking, so that we can support the child to learn those skills. Okay, so when we are, kind of reporting, so when, once we do the observation, once we use different methods for assessing the children, next comes the reporting of the assessment. So as I talked about these, the child assessment cards, you can use, similar kind of tool, or you can create your own tool where, which is an easy to use kind of a tool, where you can just, kind of use tick marks for indicating the level of the child. So based on your observation, interactions, or the portfolios which you are maintaining for the child, then you can use that information for reporting the assessment, so that you can see how you can understand the child's kind of progress. And while you are doing this, you need to keep in mind that children, they are not going to master, they're going to master these skills gradually over a period of time, and for that, they need to get varied experiences. So in your initial assessment, you'll observe that some children will be, actually many children will be needing more support for some of those skills, because they'll be in the starting of their at the starting stage of understanding that skill. So we need to provide multiple opportunities. We need to provide those specific activities which can help the child to learn that particular skill. Right. So one is that. Second, lastly, we children, they should not be expected to have ability to use all the skills in the beginning of year itself. And I'm sure you'll agree to this point, because we know that they need time to adjust to the classroom. They need time to learn those skills, so that they can follow that continuum. And for understanding each and every skill, there is a continuum. So we can't expect the child to start, kind of formal, start understanding formal numbers, unless, the child, there's no, kind of a base, there's no understanding of pre-number concepts. So first, we need to create those basic, we need to provide those basics, we need to build those that basic understanding. Then only we can expect the child that, the child to perform later, kind of more advanced skills. So we need to understand that that continuum, and each skill has a continuum. Okay, so when we are talking about classification also has various kind of levels. So we need to understand the level of the child, where the child is falling in the classification continuum, and where where I need to provide the support, from which level to what should be the next level, when we are working with children. So what should what kind of support we can provide to the child, so that child can go to the next level. So these are the kind of questions, these are the kind of kind of reflections we need to kind of make when we are assessing young children, and when we are reporting these things. So I'll stop here, and I'll because I've talked too much about, what kind of methods we can use, how we can assess, and, like, why do we need to assess young children. But I'll stop here, and, and I want you to respond to this question so that we can understand, what you all are thinking about this whole process. So this scenario is, where you notice in your classroom that, there is a child which is not engaging in group activities and often prefers to play alone. So what step would you take to assess, the child? So for this particular question, I have provided some responses. You can, give multiple response. So I'm aware that, the Mentimeter is not working for you. So please feel free to use, the chat box for providing your response. But I want to hear from you that, what step you think that, one can take for this particular scenario where the child is not engaging, kind of not interested to engage in group activities and prefer more to work, more to play alone. Okay, I see. Developmental milestones, all the above. Okay. Okay, interesting. So we can, so we can see the, so these kind of scenarios that, where we need to use multiple strategies so that we can support the child if we kind of face these kind of scenarios. And and keeping in mind, because we don't have much time left, so keeping in mind that, once we record the data, so now the next step is to analyze the data, how we want to analyze, this data. So while you analyze the data, first thing is to understand, the individual progress of the child. So there are two ways of analyzing the data. First, you understand the individual progress of the child, which can tell you that, which will show you that, certain children, they'll be struggling or falling behind in one or more areas. So you're recording observations here, the observations which you are going to record, your reflections will help you to address those issues, right? Will help you to understand how each and every child in your classroom is progressing. So you need to look at your observation records for understanding the individual process, so that you can see what the child really does, and what skills the child is using. So for example, in terms of cognitive development, you will see if the child is not able to, classify on the basis of one concept. So maybe you need to go back to your observation records and see where the child is, whether the child is having problem with the identification of concept, whether the child is having a problem with the sorting concepts, so that you can see where where you need to kind of come, and what where you need to kind of intervene. First is that. Second is, you need to also look at the trends in your classroom, trends in your whole classroom, so that you can provide the group support. So it's not kind of like always possible to provide individual support, because there'll be so many children in the classroom. So you need to understand the trends in your whole classroom, so that you can provide the group support. So for that, you need to examine the data. You need to collect all the data of all the children, and you need to consolidate the data as per the age group of the child for understanding of the patterns, so that you can plan group activities with the children for achieving those skills. So these are the two methods through which you need to analyze the data, so that you can provide the mix of both the individual support to the child as well as to the group support to the child, so that you can use the data effectively with the children. Quickly to tell you that, how you can further utilize the data, then once you get the understanding of the individual as well as the group, the support where children need support. So here, the next step is you identify the steps for improvement. So there'll be individual as well as group plans through which you can, kind of conduct activities, specific activities where children need more support. Second, you need to kind of you need to see whether what kind of improvements you need to make in your instructional practices. So what kind of teaching and learning practices you need to adopt for addressing those gaps, which you're going to identify through assessing the children. And this can also help you to reflect upon your needs. So when you are assessing the children, maybe you'll realize that there are some areas where you will be needing further training supports from your officials, so that you can you can plan those instructional practices appropriately, effectively, with the children. So this is how you can utilize the data once you kind of collect the information. I'll stop here because I know I have crossed the time. I'll stop here so that we can open up for the question and discussion. So please feel free to come in here and share your questions so that I can respond to your question. I'll be tracking the chat box so that I can respond to some of your questions. I'm sure we won't be able to take many questions, but maybe some 2-3 questions we can take, because I understand it is already 5:35 right now. Yeah.
Yes, Meenakshi. So we will now open the floor for Q&A round. Please type your questions related to the topic in the chat box, and Ms. Dogra will be happy to address them. Okay, so many thank yous for you. Okay. Participants, if you have any questions, please type in the chat box.
Okay, I see one
There's
comment.
one question. Where we can get proper format of recording assessment.
Okay. So Akshata, there's no kind of a prescribed kind of a format one can use for assessing children. There are multiple kind of tools which are available. So the one tool which I showed you, which has been developed by Ministry of Women and Child Development. So these are the child assessment cards. You can refer to these cards and you can create your own format for assessing children. So it's not kind of a like kind of required to use some kind of a prescribed format. So you can create your own format also for assessing children, so that you can get an idea that where the support is needed. Right. So you can refer to these existing formats, and you can create your own format. Yeah, I can see, any format for holistic development. So as I mentioned, you can refer to this child assessment cards. These are available online on Ministry of Women and Child Development. So you'll be able to find these cards there. You can refer to these cards, and these cards are based on the validated learning and development standards. I would like to highlight that. So you can refer to these cards very easily, so that and these will give you a very kind of a good and comprehensive idea what kind of indicators you can include within your format, which you are going to create for assessing your classroom. Yeah.
There's one, we'll take one last question. Please give me any ideas how to make assessment card. If you can, share a few things which can be added to this. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is a very important question. Quickly to tell you that, like for making any assessment cards, first you need to map all the skills which you want to assess through these assessment cards. So you need to see what are the skills and domain of development you want to include within, first the domain of development, and within those domain of development, what are the skills you want to assess. And if you are handling multi, age classrooms, then you need to have different, cards for as per the age of the child. So for within each age group, there are certain, kind of expected skills or milestones to be achieved. So you can see what milestones you want to prioritize through these assessment cards, which you can, kind of like highlight within these assessment cards. And then you can, the next step is to decide on the duration, how frequently you are going to report this data. So for example, in the child assessment cards, I mentioned that, the Anganwadi workers and the EC workforce is expected to report the assessment in every 3 months. So you can also decide something like that, because in continuous, assessment method, it is important to give adequate time to the child through multiple observations and then record the data, so that you can get that holistic picture. So you can also decide something like that, in every 3 months you can do the recording of the child, but you will be maintaining your continuous records, and in every 3 months you can report this data within the child assessment cards. So next is to decide on the duration of the assessment. So 3 things which I've highlighted for you quickly.
All right. So thank you so much, Ms. Meenakshi, for such an insightful and informative session. We truly appreciate your expertise and the valuable strategies you have shared with us today. A big thank you to all the participants for your active engagement and thoughtful questions. Your dedication to improving early childhood education is commendable. And we hope you found this session as enlightening as we did. So this concludes today's third session of our CPD initiative. We have more exciting and informative sessions lined up for tomorrow. So make sure to join us for that. Also, don't forget to participate in the quiz at the end of the third and final session tomorrow for a chance to win Amazon vouchers worth rupees 20,000. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Keep up the great work, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Until then, continue to inspire and nurture our young learners. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Meenakshi. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I've also, in the chat, I've also shared, if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to respond to your questions. I know we didn't get much time for question and answer, so I'll be happy to respond to those questions we all have. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.